Okay, so what a journey here this morning. Hopefully this recording works. This is my fourth attempt, third or fourth, depends on how you look at it. Anyway, hopefully the audio, I checked right there, and I checked that the microphone is on. I wish I could see, there must be a way to see like the bouncing microphone view. Maybe somebody can tell me about that. I don't know. Anyway, storage problems, all sorts of issues this morning. That's just the way it is, I guess. So I'm gonna try and rehash again what I went over. So much knowledge and just audio gold lost to the ages. Such a shame, but somehow we move on. So here we go. First of all, I want people to be cognizant of time in different ways. So one, cognizant that this is the dreaded, I've already talked about it, the octomester. It's 5 weeks. It's a sprint. It's crunch time. 1 day is 1 week, right? In terms of the way the course is set up, 1 week is 1 unit. So we're done. Unit 1. Once we start on Monday, we're on Unit 2, right? So, if you were late joining the course, that's terrible. I did send out links to the videos, but I know you couldn't get the content. But anyway, got to catch up. And people got to keep on top of things. So that's an unfortunate reality in this system, and that's why, these pandemic band-aids shouldn't become permanent solutions. But anyway, moving on. Also about personal contact with me. So I will respond quite quickly between the hours of say 9 and 3. I do respond, of course, outside of those hours as well, but not as efficiently or not as regularly. Just like the class ends, people leave school. I want to leave my stuff and spend time with family and stuff like that. So got to do some workouts, things like that, get some push-ups in. Can't do that if I'm constantly at the computer. That's the opposite of push-ups. Although I guess that's the opposite of push-ups, a pull-up. It isn't. It's still a resistance thing. Anyway, moving on. You get what I'm saying. So that's one thing, is that just don't expect an immediate response. You can still send messages whenever you want. If you're working on it at 1:30 in the morning, okay, that's fine. Just don't expect that at 1:30 in the morning I'm going to respond to you, right? You'll have to wait till the morning. Anyway, so send the questions. Just when you're going to get the response might be longer than you want, but we got to be reasonable. All right. Also, similar kind of thing with what am I saying? Handing in assignments. So handing in assignments, I've given you multiple ways of doing a lot of those things. With the handing in of actual physically written stuff, of course, you have to do through D2L because it's going to unlock next content down the road kind of thing. But video responses, which I do like, because it's you working stuff out, and I can watch you do that, which is just like you being in class, which is obviously the best, is the face-to-face thing. Along with that though, one, please don't script, because that's not authentic. That's not you working it out. That's you've worked it out before you come onto the camera and talked about it. It's not as a good indicator of seeing that being the problem being solved and all that kind of stuff. Also, when you're handing in pictures or videos and stuff like that, there are multiple ways you can hand things in. Just be aware, the more avenues you take outside of the portfolio app, which hopefully people can get that to work, the more avenues you take outside of that, the harder it is for me to gather things together. If people are emailing them to me, if people are sharing them on Google Apps, I will try my best, but things might get lost in the shuffle hopefully not. That's just a concern I have. Anyway, that is, I think that's all the kind of announcements. I hope, again, I've done this. This is the 4th time, and I hope I don't forget anything. All right, going with questions. So one of the questions that came up was talking about what if everybody had a job over the age of 18. So the idea of full employment. Okay, so full employment is not what you think it is. Full employment full employment in economics, which we will talk about in macro section. Full employment doesn't mean that everybody has a job. It means that the economy. That is what that says, by the way, economy. Although I don't know what it looks like. EP constantly. I don't know. So the economy is at capacity using all I guess I'll call them factors of production. There's a better description that we'll go over later, but basically all things that are use raw materials, labor, cash, all that stuff is in play. Everything is moving towards production. If you have that, then that is defined as full employment, right? The idea of unemployment, there's always going to be unemployment. It's a misnomer that you could have zero unemployment. That's not the way things work. Just think about, again, I'll go over this later on in the course, but just think about like fishermen. You can't fish for crab all year round. You can't fish for anything all year round because A, sometimes there's regulations, and B, seasons and weather take its toll on things. So at different times, and fishermen is just the one example, they're going to be unemployed. They're not working. All right, so those kind of things factor into the idea of full employment. So full employment, you can go beyond. So it is possible, right? As you move towards full employment, you're going to hit the wall though, because at some point, if you exceed full employment, those factors of production are going to be exhausted too quickly. You're going to run out of raw materials. You're going to run out of people. You're going to run out of something, and that means that supply is going to drop off. So it's not possible to exceed full employment indefinitely. It's only a short run thing. In the long run, this is what happens to aggregate supply, right? It plateaus. Okay? Prices go up, but the quantity doesn't go up. And then this aggregate demand, again, this will all come up later. But that's the idea. So that's the idea of the full employment question. The idea that can another Great Depression happen? Sort of. We had a technical, what is defined as a depression happened in 2008 with the what they call the economic downturn, but that's technically was a depression because it was 4 straight quarters of contraction or a decrease in growth. However, the same breadth and the same level of depression in terms of shrinkage of the economy? No, probably not. It would have to be some really big disasters or really big shocks to the system basically to have that happen again. In the 30s, you got to remember, the whole idea of Maynard Keynes, the economist, John Maynard Keynes, his ideas Keynesian economics weren't accepted until the latter part of the 30s and the 40s when people in power decided that spending money, borrowing money to spend your way out of a depression was a way to do things. That was not, prior to that, you didn't do that. You tightened your belt. You lowered costs. You lowered your expenses. You never spent to increase your revenues. So modern day, that's like governments that want to let's see, reduce taxes, reduce costs, privatize things. All these things are reducing expenses, but they're not willing to increase investment to increase the revenue side. So if you cut, say, you cut taxes, you're also cutting revenue, right? So you have to balance this stuff out. That's modern day stuff. Now we also have what's I alluded to before, I believe, MMT, this idea of modern monetary theory and the idea that governments can buy up debt. We're talking federal governments can buy up debt and they can continue to spend as long as the economy continues to grow. That spending will be taken care of by increased growth, increased consumer spending. It seems a bit like we're gonna have a huge bill, like when you keep ordering food and eventually they bring you the bill. It seems like that's gonna happen. I don't know. It's new. It didn't exist. This kind of thinking didn't really exist when I was taking economics. So it'll be very interesting to see it happens. But we do have that kind of debate in terms of budgeting nowadays and how much spending. And the other part of it is social programs, which is part of the third question. Social programs didn't exist to the extent they do now. So part of the reason the Depression is so harsh is that there was no social welfare net, there was no health care. People that were destitute had to look for charity organizations, and most charity organizations were basically, they'd go to the churches and get they'd get support for the poor through the churches. Now, of course, we have all sorts of social programs that are funded by the government to prevent that kind of mass poverty. The depth of the Depression, no, I don't think so. In the short run, yeah, sure, we could have things like that happen. We've already had them happen. We already have some people during the pandemic are really struggling because some industries are hit really hard, other ones are not. And with any kind of depression and stuff like that, it widens the gap between the rich and the poor. So one of the big things that came out of the Depression is the people that had money ended up with more money because they bought up properties when they were depressed in price, and then they could sell them later on or collect rents or taxes or whatever on properties they bought for cheap. So if you look at the economic downturn of 2008, you could have bought really nice oceanfront properties in Florida for cheap in comparison. Actually pretty cheap but it requires you to have money to be able to invest in that. So the rich are able to protect their assets by having the means to acquire more. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so the question was, would there be an overall savings if we stop paying for welfare? Tough one. So this is, I think this is the balance between, if you stop paying for welfare, so you save all that money, and I think the question is then, would the problems in society cost us more in the long run? Well, it depends. Would policing costs go up? Yes, because there'd be more people that are destitute and desperate to make ends meet. So you'd have more crime, sure. You probably also have more drug issues and stuff like that. Now, then that would lead to crime for stealing for the drugs and money for the drugs and stuff like that, and violence and all that comes with drugs. But the other part of the question is, well, how far are you going in terms of cutting welfare? Are you just talking about cutting welfare in terms of the program welfare, where you pay people that can't get a job or don't have a job, and you support them to be able to eat? Or are we talking about all social welfare programs, and therefore if someone has a drug addiction problem, then that's their problem if they can't pay for the treatment? So it depends how far you're willing to let people spiral into destitution, I guess. If you're going to cut all social program funding, then yeah, you might. end up with more like savings than cost, but that's only because you're ignoring the suffering of how many people. So I don't know, how do you balance that? I'm coming from the more of a socialist leaning. In my opinion, I think we need to look at some of those programs like the guaranteed income program to see if people can do better when they don't have to worry about shelter and food and just being safe. So, the whole idea of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And the pyramid on the bottom is built on those things like shelter and food and safety. So if people don't have those things, it severely impacts their decision making and it severely impacts their lives. Not having food and having to worry about things like that, there are studies that show that drops your IQ by 20 points, I think it was. Maybe it's 15, but it doesn't matter. That's still a massive drop in IQ if you think about it, because somebody who has an IQ of 120 is, at the top end of average. Somebody who has an IQ of 140, you're getting into genius land. I know there are people in history that have had IQs estimated at 200, but 140 is a very smart individual. And the difference between 100 and 120 is pretty big. 100 being near the bottom of the average kind of thing. So, taking into account something like that, if you are not able to use all your faculties of reasoning to make good decisions because you don't have the basics, you're probably going to end up with lots of problems. And in my opinion, it's better to make it so people have all this stuff, so then we can get to these things which lead to innovations. We don't know how many ideas are out there that aren't being taken advantage of because someone can't feed themselves. But again, some people disagree with that and no, probably not. For various reasons. There's other sides to the argument. I understand that, but you asked the question, I'm giving you my answer. So, okay, I'm going to end this one now, because if I record another half an hour video and it has no sound, I'm going to get very angry. So I will end this one and I'll start another one on the idea of supply and demand. Righto. See you in a bit.